Hi, good evening. Welcome to Author's Talk by Trishna. Let's begin. Story 9, The Black Walls. Dhruv had received the pepperoni pizza he had ordered. He had planned to watch a movie and eat his favorite pizza. He was alone in the house, bored and upset. Both his housemates, Chirag and Akash, who worked in the same company, were working very late tonight and eating their dinner at their office coffee shop. They were his best friends from college, now together in the same city for the past 2 years, sharing their accommodation and lives once again. Dhruv switched on TV and had barely sat on the sofa when the screen went blank. Some weird screeching sounds escaped through it. Dhruv frowned. It shouldn't happen to a new set, just a month old, though it had been happening too often lately. The day before, a technician had come to check, but he didn't been able to find any fault. In his presence, the machine had worked perfectly well. The technician had looked at him as if he was the most proficient liar of the planet. Dhruv got up in a huff and raised his fisted hand to bang the annoying set. Go away. The growling voice was crisp, clear. Was it the TV? He let his hand drop limply and looked around. Something in the house had begun to make him uncomfortable. He couldn't pinpoint, but time and again he had felt a presence here, as if he was being observed, especially when he was alone. It was a weird and creepy feeling. And now this voice. The TV suddenly came alive, making him jump out of his brooding. He heaved a sigh of relief and came back to his seat. He had taken just a bit of pizza when the screen went blank again. Annoyed, he gritted his teeth, kept the pizza box on the side table, and got up to whack the TV. One bump, and the set released a strange sound. Not the irritating screechy sound made by the bad gadget, but almost like a human scream. What was that? Dhruv was getting unnerved. He took 2 steps back. The screen was completely black, not even snowy, and then he saw it a human figure, a silhouette on a part of the TV, not covered by his body. He realized it was somebody's image. He immediately turned to see who was behind him in the room, but the room was empty. With his eyes popping out, he turned back towards the screen. The shadow appeared again, but it had moved. It was now on his other side. Dhruv stood frozen. He didn't dare to turn to check. His heart was racing. The shadow slowly dissolved. A sudden whacking sound made him turn slowly, cautiously. The box of pizza lay on the carpet, its contents scattered all over. Dhruv barely stayed to put on his slippers and then dashed out of the house. When he reached the road, he realized his legs were shivering and sweat was dripping down his face. He wiped his face with his shirt sleeve and sat on the roadside pavement gathering his nerves. Ever since he had shifted to his apartment with his 2 friends almost a month ago, there had been a lot of problems. Today in the morning when he was ironing his new shirt, there was a blast in the wire of their new electric iron and then it caught fire. So did his shirt? Never in life he had seen something like this happen. Fortunately, it was a cotton shirt, not one of those synthetic mix. Nevertheless, his favorite. He had the presence of mind to instantly pull out the plug and snuff the fire in his hands. His hands got minor burns, but he had delayed. The can of petrol sitting next to it would have caught fire too and burst like a bomb. Silly of Akash to try dry clean clothes at home. I must get rid of the petrol canister, else it will kill us. Something strange was going on, for sure. Things were not working properly like the TV set. Many gadgets had started giving them trouble, but why? And now he was hearing strange sounds too. Dhruv shook his head to eliminate these morbid thoughts invading his mind and tried to think about his latest office assignments. It was of little help when Chirag and Akash came back half an hour later. He was still sitting outside, pale and panically. Next day was Saturday. At the breakfast table in the large kitchen, Dhruv once again narrated the experience to his friends, adding details. Yar, it was so scary. That figure on the screen. I was sure someone was standing behind me. But when I turned, come on, Dhruv, Akash scoffed him. It could be an image that the TV had picked. It was inside it, blurry and black, not outside, silly. It wasn't blurry and it appeared twice. And what about my pizza falling flat on the floor? Don't be a chicken, Dhruv. You must have kept the box carelessly, half hanging out of the table. And the gravity did its job, Chirag explained with a sardonic smile. Kept my pepperoni pizza carelessly. My precious dinner. Are you joking? Dhruv was annoyed at his friends for not believing him. Then his eyes widened as he recalled something. I now remember the sofa was visible on the screen and the window too. The shadow, the human figure, was in front of the sofa, close to my pizza. Enough, Dhruv. Don't exaggerate things, Chirag said, thumbing the table. Don't make up stories to scare us. And who believes in the supernatural these days? Yeah, nobody. Chirag got up from the table in a huff and went to get stuff out from the fridge. Oh God, what's happening in his house? Now the fridge was conked off. There is something wrong with the electric wiring here. We must speak with the landlord. Hmm, I think you're right. Akash spoke through his mouth full as he munched on his toast. Okay, guys, the milk will go bad and we have some mangoes getting ready, not rot. Anyone for some mango shake? Sure, Akash said. Dhruv half heartedly gave a thumbs up, keeping his glum face intact. Chirag cut the mangoes and put them in the mixer. He then added 3 glasses of milk. Meanwhile, Akash got up to check the switches and sockets where the fridge was connected. Dhruv ate his cereal and quietly watched them. As soon as Chirag switched on the mixer, the lid popped up and hit him on his forehead with such a force that he shrieked. The milk and chopped mango zoomed out in the spluttering fountain, covering his face and clothes and making a mess on the floor. Akash couldn't help laughing at the spectacle Chirag made, standing dazed with milk and mangoes dripping down his face. Dhruv stared at him with a frown. How did that happen? The mixer wasn't too full and everything in it was cold. What made it blow up like this? Chirag quickly washed his face at the kitchen sink and then rushed to change. Akash tore a few paper towels to clean the floor. Dhruv jumped up to help. There was a big patch of tea splatter on the kitchen wall. Dhruv stared at the distinct shape a man's face. It was like somebody had sketched a side profile of a young man. Wavy hair, sunken eyes, bushy eyebrows, sharp nose. What is this, Akash? He whispered. Without bothering to see what Dhruv was pointing at, Akash turned and cleaned the mess from the wall. Dhruv brought a mop and cleaned the floor. His frown had deepened. What is happening isn't normal. He wished his friends would believe him before something serious happened. Chirag returned to the kitchen after a quick shower and a fresh change of clothes. He sat down on the chair and blew out of a whistle. A red, lumpy mark was clearly visible on his forehead. I don't understand. It's quite weird. He had a quizzical look on his face. I had just touched the button, not even pressed it, when everything blew up. I have called the electrician to check all the points. He'll be here in an hour. Great. But this house has started to bother me. We've been here only for a month, had already we've faced so many problems. Dhruv spoke hesitatingly. Chirag instantly chided him. Shut up, yaar, Dhruv. Don't try to convince us that this incident was a supernatural event. Jerking his head, he added, don't ever expect us to believe in your spooky theories, okay? Dhruv tried another angle. No, I'm not saying that. But consider this. When we had finalized the rent deal, we thought it was our windfall. A fully furnished 3-bedroom independent house for just 15,000 rupees a month. Why such a fantastic deal? There must be a reason. Irritated Chirag said. So, what's the big deal? And there have been only some minor glitches since last week. Faulty wiring. Not minor glitches, Chirag, and not normal at all, Dhruv stressed. None of them were stating what their landlord had warned them against. Please let the furniture remain where it is. Don't even think of shifting anything from its original place, he had warned. Why, sir? Chirag had asked. Why should it be a problem for you? Not a problem for me, Mr. Vora had conveyed rather too grimly. Then for whom? Dhruv had probed. Just do not shift the furniture, okay? That's all I am requesting. The man had frowned at the strange request, and then, one Sunday, they had decided to change the sitting room setup. The idea struck when they were watching TV after lunch. Akash had voiced vehemently, what a senseless place to keep the TV in front of the window. The light from the window is shining in my eyes. Haan yaar, you're right. I was wondering what was troubling my eyes. Dhruv had voiced and instantly jumped up shift the TV. Chirag had tried to stop them. Wait, boys, Mr. Vora warned us against shifting the furniture. Remember, he said that if we took a chair out of sit in the sun, we were to place it back at exactly the same place before dark. That's funny. Anyway, we'll shift it back when we leave the house, if we ever do. Now, what's his problem if we rearrange the furniture to our liking? Mr. Vora is a nutty old man, Akash had said as he stood up to help Dhruv move the furniture. Let's at least ask him the reason. Chirag had insisted, but Dhruv and Akash were already taking the TV towards the opposite wall. The sofa was kept in its place eventually. They had to redo the whole setup by the end of which they stood smiling. See what a difference it has made. Akash had beamed. The room looks more spacious and attractive. And their nightmare began hereafter, gradually, chillingly. That night, all three of them heard bizarre voices coming from the sitting room. Some were shuffling feet, strange whispers. They didn't think much of it. Next day, being a working day, they were too busy to check which of them was walking around in the sitting room at that odd hour of the night. It was only the evening that the topic arose. At the dinner table, Chirag had posed, Akash, Dhruv, which one of you was restless last night, huh? It must have been Dhruv, walking in the sitting room in the middle of the night. Were you unwell? And who were you speaking to? With yourself? Speaking on phone with his girlfriend. I knew it. Ha ha. Chirag had regarded Dhruv with raised eyebrows and a mischievous smile. No, Dhruv had glowered at them. I thought you both had gone to the sitting room to discuss something. I was in my bed the whole night. The three of them stared at each other, speechless. Then who had been in the sitting room? All of them had heard strange voices. Maybe there was someone outside, Chirag had said, trying to ease his friend's anxiousness. Outside in the garden. Was someone trying to break into our house at midnight? In that case, they must have left some clues. They had rushed to get their torches, switched on the garden light, and went out to probe. Like a team of crime investigators, they had found nothing. From the next day, all electrical gadgets began to rebel. Morning, the kettle wouldn't heat, the cell phones wouldn't charge. Dinner time, the lights would start flickering. After the dinner, the TV will stop working right at the moment of an important movie scene or in the middle of their favorite TV show. Sometimes there will be no electrical current exclusively in their house while the whole neighborhood will be lighted. They will find many mains switched off. Who was the mischief maker? They had no clue. An hour later on that Sunday, the electrician came. One by one, he checked all the electrical connections, the mains, the meter, the wiring, the individual plug points. But after about an hour, he declared, there's nothing wrong with even a single connection. No wiring is loose. I have checked it all. All points are working fine. I fail to understand why you are facing problems. And he presented his bill with a big grin, collected his payment, and left. The men decided to spend the rest of the day out. They ate lunch at Big Chill, watched a movie at PVR, and returned home late in the evening. As Chirag unlocked the door and they all stepped in, a light in the sitting room began to flicker. On, off, on, off. What's this, yaar? Which of you two left the lights on? And the electrician was wrong. There's some problem, some loose connection. Chirag turned to confront his friends, but they were not paying him any attention. They were staring at the TV set as if they were watching a horror movie. The TV was on. He had switched it off last night. Who switched it on? Who had been inside the house in their absence? Burglars. Were they still inside? Huddled together, they inspected the whole house room by room. There was nothing amiss. Finally, they returned to the sitting room, switched off the TV set, and sat on the sofa. Nobody went near the TV except the electrician. I wonder if he knows much about electrical work. Chirag grumbled and leaned against the cushion. And why are you two quacking in your boots? We aren't, Dhruv protested, wiping his face with his handkerchief. How can the loose wiring make the TV work? Please explain. True, Akash nodded with a frown. You need the remote to start the TV, don't you? So you think a ghost lives here and watches TV while we're out? Nonsense. Chirag got up in a huff and moved towards the kitchen. I am making masala cheese omelette for myself. Are you two interested? Both Akash and Dhruv exchanged glances and then quickly followed him. It was a tiring day, so they directly went to their bedrooms after dinner. Dhruv fell into a deep, dreamless sleep the moment his head hit the pillow. Sometime during midnight, he woke up with a start. He had been dreaming. Someone had called out his name. He was sure he heard a voice, a deep male voice. Then somebody had sat on his bed with a thumb and spoken. Why are you sleeping in my bed? I am tired. I too need to rest. Dhruv was wide awake now. Peering into the semi darkness, there was no visible entity around. His hand dashed for the lamp switches. Its bright light filled the room. Dhruv looked around, inspecting the room. Vacant wall stared back at him. What did he expect? It was a dream. Then his eyes went to the place where he had felt the thumb. There was a well defined depression on his quilt. Slowly he reached out his hand and touched the spot. He felt much colder than the surrounding area. He checked the time. It was a little after 2. Now my dreams too are getting weird. He shrugged and switched off the light. But it took him a while to fall asleep again. Were you wrestling at night? You look so tired. Akash asked the moment Dhruv entered the kitchen with his red, swollen eyes and disheveled hair. His two friends were ready and already eating breakfast. No, yaar, but had a weird dream at night, like someone was in my room. Couldn't sleep well. He shook his head and then sat down to narrate his experience. Akash blew out a whistle loudly. That's very strange. Chirag scoffed. What's wrong with you two? It was just a dream, okay? Nothing spooky. He took a big sip of his coffee. We are leaving early, Dhruv. Got a client call. Check all the switches before you go. I don't want to come back to the house with the lights flickering. Oh, you two are leaving early, Dhruv asked, and without waiting for a response, dashed into his room before others could finish their breakfast. He was back all depressed up. You didn't shave, didn't even take a shower, Dhruv. Don't be a dirty goose. I had forgotten I too have an early meeting. His friends knew he was lying. That evening, Dhruv reached home much before the others, around 6. But he couldn't gather courage to be alone in the house. He went to the nearby market and to while away his time. He pointlessly shopped for groceries. When he returned after an hour loaded with stuff, his housemates still hadn't returned. The house was pitch dark. He stood outside the gate, weighing pros and cons, whether to open the door and enter the house alone. Suddenly, the light of the sitting room began to flicker. In a momentary flash, he clearly saw it, a man at the window staring at him. Then it was gone like a dying flare. Dhruv shuddered. This wasn't a dream. He had unmistakably seen someone. Was someone inside? Had someone broken into the house, or was it a ghost? Something he had been suspecting all along. They needed to vacate this house. It was getting dangerous here. But his friends were just not ready to believe him. It was annoying. I am not going to tell them anything about today's incident. They are anyway going to mock me, especially Chirag, the logician. He shifted further away from the house and waited for his housemates. When Akash and Chirag returned at night, Dhruv was still posted outside. Dhruv, why are you waiting for us here, like a baby waiting for a mom to come? Chirag taunted him. Akash laughed gleefully and opened the door. Dhruv followed them inside. After a quick change, they made sandwiches, opened beer bottles, and went to the sitting room. It's warm in here and snuffy. Akash commented to open a window. They decided to watch a movie from Chirag's downloads. After the much argument, they decided on a sci-fi film, Starship Troopers. It was a battle scene where troopers were fighting strange bugs. The bluish night light from the screen filled the room with the same airy hue. Akash turned to pick his beer from the side table when his attention was drawn towards the open window. There was something hovering there, a black something, a shadow that was twitching, pulsating. The slowly it entered the room and began moving towards him, approaching horrified. Guys, do you see this anything? What's it? He whispered, trying to ward it off with his hands. What thing? Chirag annoyingly turned towards him. The shadow suddenly changed its course and sped towards the TV. Akash's eyes followed it. The glass exploded into pieces. The photo, along with the frame, went flying just inches away from the Chirag's head and hit the wall before falling on the floor. All looked at each other aghast. They had clicked this photo of the three of them together on their trip to Goa last year. Did you notice? Dhruv murmured. The glass broke first. How is that possible? And that the frame went flying as if it was tossed by someone. Akash added cautiously. His eyes expanded the fear. Chirag remained tight lipped. He knew he had a lucky escape. He switched off the TV. After a few minutes of stunned silence, he smiled and nodded. I know what was happened. It was because of the energy being emitted by the TV. Then things should keep tossing around every day in every house where there's a TV. Dhruv rolled his eyes. You missed the main thing, Chirag. The dark shadow came drifting from the outside, through the open window. I saw it entering and then also saw it hit the frame. I don't know what's going on this house, Akash said, wringing his hands. Nothing is going on. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Chirag chided him, shaking his head acceptingly. I am sleepy now. Had a long day. You guys watch the movie. I am going to bed. He stormed out in a huff. Akash and Dhruv looked at each other. They daren't switch on the TV. We need to clean the mess. Dhruv finally muttered. Akash nodded and picked up the leftover frame with the picture and placed it on the table. Together they went to fetch a broom to collect shards of the broken glass. It had been a cloudy day, and now it began to rain outside. The blowing wind brought bursts of spray in through the window. Dhruv shut the window and then both of them retired to their respective rooms for the night. Chirag hadn't been able to sleep well. The skeptic was irritated by the far-fetched claims of his two friends. Ghost in the house, really? How can educated young men think and behave like some illiterate maids? They are my friends, nevertheless. There is scientific explanation to all these presumably unexplained energies. It can be possible with so many gadgets in the house. They emit powerful electronic waves, and that's what triggered the incident. These thoughts invaded his logical mind till he fell into a fitful sleep. It was midnight when he got out of bed to go to the bathroom. With his eyelids drooping and his back slumped in the sleepiness, he used the toilet and then, when equal sluggishness, moved to the wash basin to wash his hands. As he extended his hands towards the towel, he involuntarily glanced into the mirror. There was someone strange standing right behind him, someone with a burned and distorted face. Gooey stuff was oozing out of his cheeks and chin and dripping foul down. Half his lips were missing and his teeth were exposed in a menacing grin. His reddish eyes were glaring at him angrily. In an instant, Chirag's eye flew wide open. His heartbeat stopped and he became paralyzed with shock. He gagged at his scream, got stuck in his throat. The ghastly reflection moved closer. Chirag reached and broke into cold sweat. Then the image slowly faded. Chirag stood rooted to the floor. What was that? He couldn't muster the courage to turn. He stared into the mirror and blinked his eyes a number of times. It reflected only his image now. Was he awake? Had he just had a nightmare? His mind was still debating when a hand appeared behind him. A skeleton hand, reddish brown and scalded, burnt like a face he had just seen. He knew it wasn't a nightmare, it was happening. There was someone airy behind him. The creepy hand now moved towards his neck. The extended charred fingers seemed to enclose around it. A burning sensation on his neck was clear as the whooshing wind outside. Chirag now found his voice and screamed. Both Akash and Dhruv heard the scream and jumped out of his beds. They rushed towards Chirag's room. The room was plunged in the darkness. Akash switched on the light. Chirag's bed was vacant. They noted light seeping through the slit in the bathroom door. They rushed to open the door, which fortunately wasn't bolted from inside. They found Chirag sitting on the floor of the bathroom. He was ghostly pale and his entire body was shuddering. His teeth chattered. As he tried to say something, he could barely speak. His friends helped him up and brought him to the bedroom. Akash ran to fetch a glass of water. He switched on the kitchen light. With a loud spark, the whole house plunged into darkness. He hurried back and found Dhruv and Chirag rushing out of the room. There's someone there, in Chirag's room, Dhruv whispered. We both just heard it, a growling voice clearly. Get out. There was a thunderstorm raging outside. The rain was pouring down in the torrents. It was impossible to step out in such a downpour. All three hurried into Akash's room, for a street lamp directly outside the window rescued his room from complete darkness. Akash shut the door and switched on his 8 battery torch. His friend's presence helped Chirag to muster enough courage to narrate what he had encountered. His speech wasn't normal yet. There was a tremor in it, keeping his voice as low as possible, for he was afraid someone else was listening too. He told them about the strange apparition he had seen in the mirror. As I screamed, the hand faded before my eyes, just like a face. Akash held Chirag's shaking hand in his to support him, but all three were petrified. If Chirag, the fearless theorist, could be so terribly frightened, it was a highly alarming situation. Were their lives in danger? Sorry, yaar, I never believed you both. I never believed in ghosts. But this house is indeed haunted. There's a ghost or ghost in here, he concluded. Barely had he finished his narrative that they began hearing rustling sounds originating from Dhruv's room next door. The sound slowly moved on to the sitting room. They didn't dare to open the door to check. So terrified they were. All three spent the rest of the night clustered together and praying. The scrapings continued unabated. The sound stopped only at the crack of dawn. The men refused to leave their relatively safe sanctuary yet. The forbidding silence was frightening. They had no idea what awaited them outside this room. They could muster courage to come out of the room only in the comforting bright light of the sun. Much past the time they usually left for office, all the bedrooms led to the sitting room. That they were immersed, slowly bunched together, and then stood aghast. The wallpaper in the sitting room was in tatters. Behind it, blackened walls gaped him. They could also partly see the wall in Dhruv's room in the same condition. Okay, friends, it's time to call the landlord to demand on explanation. Akash declared in a hushed tone as they sat in the kitchen munching toast, their meager breakfast. None of them had either the energy or the drive to go to the office. Also, they needed to surf the net to find another accommodation. Chirag punched Mr. Vora's number on his cell phone and put his phone on the speaker mode. Mr. Vora, something is not right with this house. We need to see you urgently. Sorry, I'm busy. Can't come today. Akash added sternly, Mr. Vora, you haven't visited the house even once, even to sign the rent agreement and hand over the key to us. You invited us to your house. Why don't you ever come here? That's right. There must be a particular reason, Mr. Vora, Dhruv stated crossly. No, there's no reason. Now, if you all excuse me, I have to go somewhere. Look, Mr. Vora, either you come to see us here immediately or we are coming to your house with the police. Well, also file a court case against you for hiding facts from us. No, there's no need to involve the police. After some hesitation, Mr. Vora said, Okay, I'll see you now, but only for 10 minutes. That's fine. And Chirag disconnected the phone. He turned towards his friends. Mr. Vora is clearly hesitant to come here. Why? There's something fishy in the whole affair. Half an hour later, the bell rang and Dhruv ushered in Mr. Voras, the landlord. He entered sheepishly, looking around in every direction and stopped dead as soon as he saw the tattered wallpaper. He sucked in his breath and stood stunned. He was led to the kitchen, the place completely clean. Mr. Vora, we are leaving the house today. Till we find a new accommodation, we'll stay in the guest house. But not here. Not a day more, Chirag declared. Mr. Vora was speechless. The expression on his face was a mix of fear and helplessness. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but then hesitated and looked down. Chirag sighed audibly. He went and plugged the kettle to make the tea for everyone and then came to sit next to Mr. Vora. The others joined in. But before that, we need an explanation. Who are these people, the ghost, haunting this house, and why? Dhruv asked. Mr. Vora sighed, shook his head, and wiped his brow. It seems to be haunted by the spirits that didn't get their salvation. But why didn't they? There had been a tragedy here. What tragedy? Akash asked. The couple that owned the house had been burnt alive in a fire. Oh, how? Perhaps there was a short circuit in the bedroom's air conditioner and the curtains caught fire. How was it that the couple continued to sleep through it? Why didn't they rush out to save themselves? Dhruv probed. Mr. Vora was quiet for a few seconds and then cleared his throat and said, Actually, there was a party in their house that evening. The man and his wife had consumed a good amount of alcohol and most likely they continued to sleep like logs. The fire spread quickly before they realized and could rush out. It was too late. Both of them were shattered to death. How do you know about the party? Chirag looked at the Mr. Vora with narrowed eyes. Well, actually, I was there. I saw them drinking a lot. So you knew the couple? Akash asked. They were my distant relatives. Mr. Vora lowered his eyes. Is he telling the truth? Chirag wondered and shrugged. Terrible, he said, shaking his head. That explains the frightening face I saw in the mirror. Now I realize it was a face that was shattered in a fire. Akash drew in his breath, and Dhruv shut his eyes tightly and shuddered at he could envisage the scene. Mr. Vora looked up at Chirag in alarm. Nobody claimed to have seen a face before. You are the first one. I am the first in many things. Chirag spoke annoyingly. By the way, then how did you become the owner of this house? I bought this house for renting purposes, Mr. Vora replied in a subdued tone. It wouldn't have been if I had known I would face such immense problems. The price offered for this primary property was too good to refuse. I spent a lot of money on its repairs, and you are the sixth tenant in the 2 years relinquishing the rent deal. Though you stayed for the maximum period, 1 month. Others couldn't stay here for more than a week. He shook his head dejectedly. I don't know what to do with this Albert cross hanging around my neck, he said with his head bowed and hands limp on his lap. He made a pitiable figure. Mr. Vora, you should have at least warned us. Although Dhruv was annoyed, he couldn't speak harshly. I warned you in a way. The ghosts residing here do not like the furniture moved. Don't ask me why, for I have no clue. But none of my tenants, including you, took my words seriously. The problem starts after the furniture is moved from the original place, and I have noted that you have made changes in the sitting room. You should have told us this specifically at the time of the signing the agreement. Will you have taken the house then? Moreover, I thought you were young and fearless and perhaps things wouldn't be so bad. Young or old, who wouldn't be afraid of ghosts? Chirag remarked. Dhruv and Akash exchanged glances. What about the walls? Why cover them with wallpaper and not get them painted? Akash posed. Do you think I didn't try? I got this house painted 11 times, mind you, 11 times. Especially that one bedroom that belonged to the couple and the sitting room. But each time within days the paint disappeared. There was no other way to conceal the charred black walls. Oh, Mr. Vora tightly shut his eyes and shook his head in utter helplessness. The wallpaper was the last resort. Even this hasn't been successful in the hiding the spooky walls. What's happening? Suddenly Akash's agitated voice drew everyone's attention. The three men stared in a horror at Mr. Vora. His hands were covered in black soot. Mr. Vora squealed and reached for a napkin lying on the table to wipe his hands. But before he could do that, walls of black dust rose from the walls and began to fall on him. He jumped and tried dusting it off his clothes. It was a futile effort. Squirts of black dust now fell directly on his face. He screamed in terror and ran towards the exit door. Liar! Murderer! His three tenants clearly heard a spooky, ghostly voice arise from the walls as they rushed out of the house following the owner. There was a whooshing sound of water boiling in the kettle, and then a loud blast trailed them. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. Have a very good night. Thank you so much.